It is the summer, so what do you do in the summer? You go to camp. At least some of us do or did. And that's kind of what's going on here. But what happens at this camp? Let's see if we can find out a little bit more, starting with the IMDb plot. A story of impossible redemption, modern witchcraft, and duels that repeat themselves like cursed cycles. Yeah, okay. I don't know about that. All right, so here's another new movie here, and you mentioned camp and obviously going in the woods and whatever, and we see a lot of camp movies, horror in the woods and whatever. So possibilities for some good stuff to happen, and maybe not. Yeah, I don't know if that sets the tone here or not, but let's talk a little bit of what's going on here before we really get into camp. Um, all right, so here we start off here with an introduction to a young woman here, and she has some issues, and she has a tragic moment happen early in the film, and she tries to stay attached to her dad, but kind of to decide what she wants to do next in her life, and maybe to get over this moment, and the best thing for her is to go to this camp, and she kind of takes it on as going to a religious camp, or a camp that has a religious theme behind it, while maybe they're not openly advertised as religious. um, that's kind of her take on it. And she's not going as a camper there. She's going to kind of be a camp counselor. But in a way, it is also, as a camper, a little bit in her own mind, because it is for her to kind of escape and experience something different, and just to kind of break away from some of the stuff that's been going on in her life. So maybe this can give her a breather, or something that she needs, before she gets back to reality, and so forth. So we kind of see the tragic moments, and we see her get to camp, the introduction to some of the other camp counselors. We see that many of them have done this for a while now. Maybe one or two of them were actually, campers at one time, but now they're counselors. So we kind of get that fill in there, a little bit about them, but not too much. Um, we get to see a little bit of experience before the campers get there, then when the campers get there. Some dealings with the campers, and the campers that go there. Again, they're also not hey, let's have some fun at camp, because we're great people and whatever, and everything in life is seemingly going good. Some of them might be that way, but some of them also might be having some issues of their own, and so forth, which is why they're there as well. But as far as that, really being a religious thing, and completely over the top, it's not really there. Maybe some influence here or there, but it turns out not to be heavy on the religious here. Um, Obviously, in the summary, there was mention of witchcraft, so maybe that's kind of an overhang. I think there's one character that kind of maybe leans on religion a bit, and does most of the mentioning of that. While maybe some of the other characters are not kind of into that, or whatever. Um, so we do a lot of camp stuff. We do a lot of learning, about some of the characters. We see the main character here, her, kind of have these moments of pause, and kind of thinking about her past, thinking about some of the things that have happened. Um, she kind of has these sequences where, is she dreaming, or is she just kind of caught in a haze? Is it um, moments where it might seem like is it really happening, but is it, at least to her? I think as the audience, you kind of know, when she's kind of in this, kind of dream sequence or thinking about something. Um, so definitely a lot of reflection for her and focus. Obviously, she is the character here on, what is going on. Her to kind of figure out, her place in life, but now her place here in this camp because, you know, there's something, she kind of, you can kind of gather that she feels is off, but she can't quite put her finger on it, and then so forth as we kind of go on. Um, so obviously this is going to go on and on until obviously the moment where, it is more known that, there's a witchcraft kind of theme going on here and so forth. And then, they kind of dive into that as the film, heads towards this conclusion. Um, yeah, that was a pretty, crappy summary, and I'll admit that. For really, was not, it's a crappy summary basically because it's not really what I came to see and want to see or cared to see. It wasn't excited, as I was watching. Um, I've said this, on several occasions, I do tend to get bored and annoyed when I watch what is themed, and it says, directly, I'm looking right here at IMDb, it says horror says horror, it says nothing else, horror, and as I watch a movie and cannot, X amount of time goes by and, I'm just not really putting my finger on the horror, or the horror is just not jumping off the page. Um, yeah, you have a little tragedy at the beginning of the film with the girl. Yeah, you have these weird kind of dream sequences and whatever, blah blah. That's all to me kind of like, if you want to say, hey, that's the horror in the film, that's just weak horror. That is just like, just because you have some, odd moments and moments where, you make the audience maybe think this or that or whatever, doesn't mean that it's necessarily horror or whatever. Doesn't mean that you're diving into it. Doesn't mean you're giving me anything thrilling or whatever or super exciting. One scene where, oh my God, there's some blood on the floor. Oh my God, but I'm not going to mention why that's there, but it's there for a reason, and it's not really anything to do with horror. So like, I was, starting to look, at the time, how much time has passed, and where is the moment where, I can say horror. And obviously, as a blood and guts person, I want someone to die. I want someone to, suffer an injury. Obviously, this is not a slasher movie, so I'm not expecting someone to, come out of the forest and start, killing the campers. Different movie, or one of many different movies. I obviously not expecting that, but you got to give me something, to chew on, something to think about, a big something to come, something to expect, something to go, oh, okay, and it barely ever comes, and even when the moment where you find out, the witchcraft is coming or whatever. It's just weak overall. Like it's just nothing. They're not going to do anything spectacular here, witchcraft wise. I'm sorry to disappoint you, and I try not to do too many spoilers here. But I'm not going to say specifics, but it's never going to be anything big. Yeah, they'll have their moments, but to me, it just fails largely on a witchcraft theme even as well. I think, maybe one of the reasons why I disliked it and just became disinterested in it as it went on, maybe this was meant, most of the characters here are women, young women. Obviously there's, whenever there's witchcraft and whatever, it tends to be about a sisterhood, and there obviously is in a way, and obviously this young woman here who's having issues, is trying to find her place in the world, but also within this group, and obviously she's not sure where her place is, and not that they made it hard on her, but they don't come right out and like say, hey, we're witches, be with us. It takes some time, and they let her kind of go through some stuff and some thinking and deal with her issues before what is revealed to her. So the movie, kind of, maybe lends itself to sisterhood and the experience and what this young woman is going through and overcoming and that kind of stuff. And that's all fine and good, but it really has no interest in me. I'm not really relating to this experience and what is happening, and I'm just looking to see when the horror is happening in this movie. Are the witches going to do any evil magic spell and do something really really bad, and or when are they going to turn on each other and do this and that, and it just goes on and on and on and about I don't even know what like her experience, and then adapting her, and then they do one kind of spell thing and whatever, or maybe some minor ones, and then one kind of thing at the end, and then I guess you're supposed to feel great because maybe she's now found her place and whatever. So I mean, if you're into that and you're rooting for her and you feel bad for her and you happy that she found her place and so forth, at least for the time being or whatever, and are happy with dream sequences being basically your real horror feel of this movie, fine. Fine. The movie is an hour and 50 minutes. It feels every bit of that. If it was me, there's a ton of stuff I'd cut it out just because they're just not interested, and if it doesn't have the horror in it that I'm looking for, basically cut out most of it. Sadly here, it has, I guess, about 200, I guess ratings here on IMDb, a 5.1. So, I guess not a lot of people have seen it, and those who have seen it are, not blown away by the movie either. So I don't feel bad for the few that have seen it, or for feeling the same way as the few that have seen it. Do I feel bad for seeing it? Maybe. Yeah, I'm being a little harsh, and I don't like to do reviews that I'm harsh, but, I kind of felt, that, sometimes I just have to do a review of movies that I don't like as well, throw them in here to stop telling you guys, 3 pools of blood, 4 pools of blood, and blah, blah, blah. So, as much as I don't like it, I have to do, these reviews from time to time. And I'll be honest to say that I feel like I've seen a string of movies now that I just not big fan of. I saw one the other day, was not a fan of it. I don't, and I don't have it in me to do a review for that one movie. I'm not going to do it, but it really, annoyed me as well. So, yeah, when a movie says horror and I watch it and I see a direct lack of horror in it, that really gets under my skin. You can do horror and maybe the movie's bad, but at least I see the horror in the movie. I can see where they're going. I'm like, okay, at least they gave it a try. But here it is, horror is attached, but has a severe lack of it. Maybe they should have put something else there instead. So yeah, enough of this. I think I've given this as much as I need, and probably a little bit too much. I'm giving this 1 pool of blood, and why it didn't get less, I don't know. Maybe I'm showing it some bit of mercy, but I'm going to give this 1 pool of blood, and yeah, I guess a little bit of mercy there, and leave it at that. So with that, it's going to be 1 pool of blood out of 5. So with that, horrorscorereviews.blogspot.com is where you can find all my reviews written in video. Certainly tons of video reviews for a while now, so you can like, subscribe, do everything everybody else does here on YouTube. If not, no worries, it is okay. I thank you for your time regardless. Blue Sky, Facebook information down below if you want to reach me there, talk about horror, real horror movies, definitely in the comment section. If you have a different view and you like this movie and you want to explain why, please go for it. I'd love to hear it. That's fine. We can agree to disagree. And with that, I will catch you on the next review, horror fans.